Once upon a time, in a small township in South Africa, there lived a curious girl named Refilwe. Every day she would wake up, hop over a fence, taking the quickest route to a small modest library where the world of books unfolded endless possibilities. Refilwe had a profound passion for reading, with each book transporting her to different places and fueling her dreams of one day exploring those very destinations. Inspired by the remarkable women who were making a difference in her community, she envisioned herself becoming a doctor, driven by a strong desire to also serve others. One day, many years later, after completing her degree in microbiology and biochemistry, she joined an airline as a flight attendant to repay her student debt and save money for future education. As a flight attendant, she traveled the globe, immersing herself in the beauty of diverse cultures and breathtaking landscape. Her fascination with aviation deepened. Because of that, she decided to take a leap of faith and enroll in flight training. She faced numerous challenges until finally she received a cadetship to pay for her training and earned her wings, becoming one of the first Black female pilots in her country.
So I've been now in the aviation industry for more than 20 years, and initially it was not something that I wanted to do. And the reason why I didn't want to do it, or I've never thought about aviation, is because I was never exposed to the aviation and aerospace industry. So I was born during a different time in South Africa, during apartheid time, where career opportunities were limited to a certain demographic of people.
Welcome to A Life Worth Working. I'm Michelle Weiss, a writer on the future of learning and work.
And I'm Dana Allen Walsh, an executive coach and pastor.
We love to think about work, not just as a means to a paycheck, but also as a process of becoming.
Each week, we talk with guests who open up about the messiness, transformation, and wonder of their work lives.
Something we call the soul of work. In this episode, we chat with Refilwe Ledwaba. She beamed in for our podcast all the way from South Africa to share more about her incredible work.
Refilwe became South Africa's first female Black helicopter pilot.
She now leads Girls Fly Africa, a nonprofit she founded in 2017, which introduces girls, women, and youth across the African continent to the idea of flying as a career, as well as coding and robotics through STEM education.
And what you'll want to pay attention to in this episode are the various ways in which Refilwe talks about how important this process of exposure is.
Her life's mission is to introduce young girls to aviation and aerospace, partly because she had never grasped that this was a possibility for herself.
It was my first flight, and in that first flight, the pilot happened to be female. And I was curious, not because I wanted to become a pilot, but because I've never seen a female pilot. And when I hear, the word from the flight deck, this is the captain speaking. And so I asked the cabin crew, what is that another cabin crew? What does that mean? Because that's a female voice. And she said to me, no, that's it's a pilot. So I'm like, wow, interesting. Sort of kind of remove that perception that, when I was growing up, only male were pilots. So there were female pilots. So I think that was the start of something, even though I didn't know it at that time.
Because she had so few Black working female role models, Refilwe picked the path to something she knew. She was on the path to becoming a doctor. She had been studying biochemistry and microbiology and excelling at university.
I was born from a family of 7 and raised by a single mother.
Wow.
And because of that, we really didn't have a lot of resources. So I had to literally put myself through university. So when I finished my university, I had student loans, which amounted to more than 100,000 that I had to pay back before I can continue to medical school. So that sort of set me on a different path because I had to find a job. So what normally happens in South Africa, if you owe a university that amount of money, they actually keep your certificate.
Wow.
So you actually have nothing to show that you have actually completed your degree. So even though I had completed my degree, I didn't have the paperwork because I needed to pay for the university. So when I was looking for a job, I could not find a job as a scientist because I did not have the paperwork. to prove that I had finished my undergraduate degree.
It's crazy to think that Refilwe had done all the hard work of completing her degree. And because she couldn't pay for that degree, she couldn't get access to the proof of her proficiency.
And instead of getting to start her career, she had to find work for the sole purpose of being able to get that diploma for her dream job.
Yeah, it's so different from the US, where you can have enormous amounts of debt. But if you actually complete that degree path, you get to keep moving forward in your career. You get to feel that forward progress.
Refilwe started working as an airline attendant to pay the bills. And initially, she was distraught because she had this caricature in her mind that after crushing it in college in math and science, that she'd suddenly be serving people tea and coffee on an airplane.
Thankfully, she was surprised to learn that she actually got to learn safety and the mechanics of how the plane flies.
I started learning about the industry and the different careers about the industry, and I just fell in love. And for some reason, it was also the first time that I actually left the country, had a passport stamped, and I was like, this is a beautiful career. I can see the world.
Yeah.
And my passport is getting stamped. And I started kind of like reframing what I thought was a challenge and what I thought was the saddest moment in my life into one of the most pivotal moments, because I traveled. I started seeing the world. I started learning about something that I didn't know about, started meeting a lot of people. But also, there were all these pilots coming to me. They're like, you're so smart, you should be flying. So it's almost like, the universe conspiring and saying, this is your thing. And I'm just thinking, I need to stay here. And that's when I started thinking that's what I should do. And because I had a head and I've seen I've had a woman 2 years before, it wasn't something that I thought I wouldn't do at that point when I made that decision. But also the people that were around me, they were so supportive, which was, I think, at that time, quite odd, especially where South Africa was. And it was white males that were saying, you should be flying. And it was odd because of where South Africa was just coming under, out of apartheid. And that was not expected, when I started kind of like sort of reflecting about, that particular moment. And eventually one of the pilots said to me, you know what, I've got an aircraft. You don't have to pay for an aircraft. You don't have to pay for an instructors. I'm going to take you for an introductory flight. And as they say, the rest is history. I went on that introductory flight. I remember I was looking outside and I'm like, you know what? This is exactly what I want to do. I want to fly. And the reason why I didn't choose it earlier is because it was never a viable career choice for me, because there were never people that looked like me that were doing the job to make me think that was a job, a job for me. So I started taking flying lessons. And I think I stumbled again, another challenge. But this time around, I started embracing challenges because I thought, they're always kind of like when I pivot or when there's a challenge, something good comes out of it. And I could only afford 1 hour because I had to pay my student loan and fly. So I could only afford an hour to actually fly.
Just to take that 1 hour lesson, Refilwe would have to endure the unpredictability of South African taxis. At the time, you had to wait for a large taxi to fill up with around 15 people before it would start moving. So she would often be waiting for 45 minutes to get to one place where she'd have to switch to another taxi and wait for it to fill up and get to the next part. It was taking her sometimes 3 hours to get to the right place to take that 1 hour of flying. How on earth was she going to make it to 200 hours?
Another roadblock was stymieing her progress. Refilwe was starting to feel desperate.
So I decided, you know what, I'm going to ask for help. So I wrote 200 letters to anybody that I thought had extra 100 or whatever. I was going to raise that money for my license. I wrote 200 letters, and out of 200 letters, I had 3 responses. The responses was the South African Police Services. And at that point, they were also looking to be training women because there were not a lot of women that were flying, and they were also looking to train a lot of people of color because there were not a lot of people of color that were flying. So, that saying that when preparations meet opportunity. So I had a science degree, meaning maths background. I already was flying, so which means I had a bit of background. So they invited me through.
Again, it felt like the forces were conspiring to get her to fly. The South African police wanted someone exactly like her. It was a godsend. But of course, there was yet another twist. They wanted Refilwe to be a helicopter pilot.
When I joined them, they were going to train me to become a helicopter pilot, which is something that I really didn't want to do. But the reason why is because I didn't know what helicopter pilots do. I've never been exposed to any work about the helicopter flying. So I wanted to be an airline pilot, but I saw that they also have aeroplanes. So in my head, I'm thinking I'm going to join them and, fly a little bit and then go back to the airlines and fly, fly for the airline. So I wasn't planning to actually stay long. And I joined them and I started training, to become a helicopter pilot. And then I qualified. And it was so odd because I actually didn't know when I qualified that I was the first woman of color in South Africa to qualify as a helicopter pilot. Because the day that I get my wings, I see there's a lot of people, they're there and there's cameras. And I'm like, what's happening? They're like, oh, you're the first woman of color. I'm like, really? Wow. Because honestly, I didn't know. So it was just two things. Something that I actually never planned to do because I actually wanted to fly aeroplanes. And then I actually went on to break barriers, which was actually fascinating. But the most fascinating part was I really loved flying helicopters. I thought I'll stay for about, a year or two. I ended up flying 10 years.
Wow.
Helicopters, and you couldn't get me away from it. And which goes to show, that, sometimes we choose certain things because we don't know. Not because it's not something that would be passionate about or we're not exposed to. Because honestly, if somebody had exposed me to helicopters earlier, I would have chosen that path. And I really enjoyed, flying the helicopter.
Today, Refilwe runs her own nonprofit called Girls Fly Africa.
Imagine a small plane landing in a remote village. Out step two women, dressed in ordinary clothes. To the community, they look like everyone's daughters, but they're the pilots. In that moment, fathers and mothers begin to see something new, that girls can fly, that women can chart their own course, and that their daughters can bring back economic opportunity as captains of the skies.
If we had to take a young girl from a deep rural area, and we made a lot of assumptions, they've never seen an aeroplane, they've never driven a car, the environment that they're coming from is not supportive in a way of women getting into sort of careers. They're kind of limited. So if we had to take that young girl and help them through the way into a left-hand seat of an A380, an A380 is the biggest jet in the world. And the left-hand seat is the captain of an A380. If we had to take them into a left-hand seat of an A380, or if they had to become aerospace engineers or aeronautical engineers, what are the barriers that they will need to overcome? The first thing, I didn't know anything about the industry, that it actually exists. So we needed to actually get information about young people. The second thing, we needed to be visible. We needed to be there. Because I wanted to become a doctor because I saw somebody that looked like me being a doctor, and visibility and representation really matters. So I wanted to make sure that we're visible, that the little amount of women that are there, we can go out there and be visible to these young people. The third thing was the things that I struggled with. And my thinking was, how many girls come from the same background, hadn't seen an aeroplane, hadn't driven a car, a bike, same background, that will probably face the same challenges that I have, that I had faced. So those things are the things that really inspired me or encouraged me to sort of start the organization.
Today, Girls Fly Africa is not only preparing the next generation of pilots, aerospace engineers, and innovators, but it also provides scholarships, mentorship, and networking opportunities, crucial supports for girls from rural areas who have never even seen an airplane before. Refilwe has built in very specific ways of combining exposure and early skills building into her programs because she saw how much harder her own learning journey was without these scaffolds. When she was early in her helicopter training, she was struggling.
I really struggled. There's a maneuver in helicopter, they call it hovering. So hovering is the helicopter take off and it comes to like sort of a standstill. So when you're looking from it from the outside, the helicopter is like standing still kind of thing. So it looks quite easy. But inside the helicopter, you are using everything, highly coordinated maneuver. So you're using your legs to stop the helicopter from what we call yawing, left, right. You're using what we call a cyclic to stop it from rolling, left, right, and center. And you've got a collective to stop it from going up and down. So you've got these three movements that you need to do to actually stop the helicopter from just moving all over, to actually stand still. Highly coordinated maneuver. I could never do that. Like I would use the legs and the one hand and then use the other hand. So it wasn't coordinated and my helicopter will move from one corner to the other. And it came to a point where I actually I thought this is not for me. I don't think I'll be able to do this. And I wanted to actually quit, but I was also on the verge of what we call being washed out. So there's milestone that you have to get to be able to continue. So like at 20 hours, you need to be at a certain point. And I was a way behind. My classmates were a way ahead of me because of that particular maneuver. And they changed and they let me fly with this other instructor. And the instructor, before we can even go flying, he came to me and he just started asking questions, my background, what activities did I do when I was young. And he jokingly is like, you can't even drive a car and you're going to fly this helicopter. Your motor skills, it's so amazing that your motor skills develop when you're young, like riding a bike, a bicycle and all these things. But the way I grew up as a young girl in a semi-rural township area, those are the things that I wasn't doing. I was washing dishes or playing in the streets, but I wasn't riding a bike or, learning how to drive a car and all those things. And so he's like, okay, we're going to have to do like 1 or 2 coordination exercise. So we took off and the first day we didn't even follow the actual lesson pattern. We started doing coordination exercise. And while we were flying, he noticed the second thing. So when I'm flying as a lady and I can see you're sitting and you've we sit with our legs crossed, right? And that's how we try to be sitting. Now with a helicopter, the cyclic, it sits right in between, the legs. So which means that you have to like sort of sit comfortable with legs apart. So the movement of the cyclic can be free. So by crossing my legs, I was restricting the cyclic from actually flying the helicopter properly. And that was the second reason why I couldn't fly. So like culturally, like as a woman, it's something so simple that could really, make it difficult for me. But as well, the context how I grew up and how I was socialized and the things that I did when I was young, they were really 15 years later or 20 years later having an impact on, the way I was flying. Even though I had flown like an aircraft few hours, that still was not enough to actually, kind of help me. So he went up and he did a lot of exercises. And then second day, did a lot of exercises. And the third day, I'm taking off that helicopter, smooth, on the dot, hovering, not moving left, right, and center. And I actually looked at him and I'm like, sir, are you flying? He's like, no, you're flying.
Wow.
The helicopter. That was so amazing. And then transition, then flew, and then he's like, okay, do it again. We did what we call a circuit. And then he came out, he went inside and he came back with like a huge brick and put it in. And I'll explain why, like a bit, like in a second, why he had to put extra weight in the helicopter. And then he had an external radio outside, like a radio outside. He's like, you're on your own. So that's what we call first solo. So in each and every training, after a certain amount of hours, you have to go solo, which means the first flight on your own. And so when the confidence that you've mastered certain maneuvers, they send you solo. So that was my first solo. So he was outside the helicopter on the radio and he says to me, okay, go up. And then I went up and the helicopter was still. And now he was not inside. And he's like, land, I landed. Go up again, go up. Landed. And he gave me like a sign, you're on your way, go. So I transitioned and I went on my own and did a circuit and that was it. And I wasn't kicked out from the program and I didn't quit. And I stayed. And that was so awesome. And obviously when you come back, everybody celebrates because that's the first flight that you did on your own. And as they say, the rest is history. I managed to catch up with the rest of my class and even finish ahead of everybody.
Wow.
So So I think that particular moment taught me a few things. Context matter. We don't all start from the same place.
Yes.
Some people started, and most of the time we don't really look at where the person is coming from, what the background are. We're very quick to dismiss them because they're struggling. And once I overcame that particular challenge, I was on my way. Nobody could stop me.
I love this story because it illustrates how a barrier can be so small, but it requires an unlocking to happen mentally, physically, and culturally.
Refilwe's cultural etiquette to keep her legs close together made it nearly impossible for her to be successful in the context of flying a helicopter.
And this is why Girls Fly Africa also works intentionally on reshaping the very systems of training and education that too often leave women behind. The organization builds early awareness, shifts community perceptions, and equips young women with both technical training and important leadership skills.
Refilwe shared that they work hard on teaching young girls to be more assertive because it is nearly antithetical to how they're raised.
The aviation industry requires that you become very assertive in a way that you have to make decisions. As a captain, you have to make decisions, sometimes split decisions. But the assumptions that we made about this young person is they grew up in a way that they were not allowed to kind of talk back. They were allowed to be in a way conservative, like that conservative. So that assertiveness hasn't been part of who they are. In a way, I always say, they respect authority. You have to respect authority. I'm not saying you don't have to respect authority, but at some point you have to be assertive and you have to be able to question certain things. So we made assumption that girl is not going to question. They're going to be saying yes, no, or wait for instruction. So we needed to give them those soft skills, how to become assertive, how to speak up. What does it mean to be a captain? What does it mean to take decisions? How does it mean to, your voice? And, you cannot be thinking. Yes, you think, but certain things need to happen. So those skills we needed to give them. But the skills about building coordination as well, before they can even enter the industry. So we developed programs that we can work. They can go on and can do a bit of flying. They can work in the simulators. And because we realized that for us to change the methodology and the syllabus, which means the system, it's going to take a little bit longer, for which it's something that we are doing, parallel. But in the meantime, while we're working into changing how the system works, we also needed to be developing something that could make sure that they're ready when they get to the, that traditional system that was built.
I'm just amazed by how you've taken your individual journey and now are such an advocate for individual and systemic change. It's so powerful to hear what you're doing and the ways that you're changing the lives of other women.
Refilwe, I just had one question. Did you ever get your degree? Did you ever get it back?
Yeah, so I paid back their money and they sent me the certificate a couple of years later. And then I went on to do my postgrad. I went on to do my master's. And I'm actually now doing my second master's in inclusive innovation and looking at building inclusive aerospace systems.
Oh my
and I'm also looking at going on to do my PhD. So eventually when I became a pilot, I had enough money to pay to pay them back. Yeah.
Amazing. We have a metaphor that we work with around the idea that the manure of life, the shit, the hard stuff, how that becomes compost for good things to grow. And so we'd love to hear for you, what's been a moment of stuckness or something hard, an obstacle you faced and you've overcome and you've been able to see good things grow out of that?
That pivotal moment when I couldn't go to medical school, for me, that was the shittiest moment in my life, because I had really worked hard to be at a point where I could do what I needed to do. It was the lowest point of my life. But what I didn't mention was another story as well that goes with that when I started, obviously when I got to a point where I started my flying lessons and I needed to start flying and I couldn't afford it. And also that was the shittiest time because it was the second time around. Like initially I couldn't go to medical school and the second time around I couldn't afford now to be flying. And it was, I was really stuck and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I remember I started becoming very negative into, why is this happening to me? Wallowing into this kind of shitty moment and really feeding into that shitty moment as well to even become, because I needed something to just feed on. Yeah. And we did a flight to Addis Ababa as a cabin attendant. And so we were laying over in Ethiopia for about 5 days there. And I was also sitting in my room, continued to wallow in my misery. And there was a guy named Paulus, and he was one of the butlers at the hotel, and he would bring coffee so he'd bring whatever that I needed to drink. And the second day he said to me, "Why are you sitting in the hotel? Why aren't you going out?" And so I'm looking at him, I'm like, so I didn't really even want to go out. And he said, "Okay, I'm off tomorrow. I'll show you, Ethiopia and what it looks like." And for that day, I was a bit of a skeptic at that point, and I'm thinking, he's a stranger, but something in me, I thought, okay, you know what? It's fine. Let me go with him. He's at the hotel. I'll tell everybody where I'm going. Everyone who knows him here at the hotel, I'll actually even tell the hotel that I'm going with him. So I decided I'm going to go with him. So in the morning, I packed up. So he rocks up with an old car and we started driving around Ethiopia and he's showing me all this place. So initially, when I was looking at Ethiopia, I'm looking at this hotel in the middle and Ethiopia then, like 20 years ago, there's a whole lot of shacks. And that's what I saw. There's like shacks outside. And here I was driving with this guy. He's so proudly showing me things that I wasn't seeing. In that shacks, there's like makeshift restaurant. And they were selling the most delicious food in there. And then we went in, we ate the food. And I found out as well that his dad was an author. So I met the family and we're moving around. And by the end of the day, I went back to my hotel and I looked out. I didn't see shacks anymore. It was people, houses, and he sort of reframed the way I looked at Ethiopia through his eyes. There was a man who had so much little, but he spoke positively about what was around him. And when we were eating and going out, I'm like trying to pay because I'm thinking, oh, I'm earning more than him. And it's like, no, you're in my country. And when you're in my country, we take care of people. And that was my aha moment of getting out of that wallowing. Yeah. Because a guy that had less than me had nothing negative to say about the world. Wow. And I remember we were landing back at Johannesburg, and the captain was saying, welcome to Johannesburg. And for everyone that comes from this country, welcome home. And I just cried. Oh. Because for the first time, I saw things differently. And the next day, that's when I wrote those 200 letters. And within a week of that flight, that's when I started my flying. And that particular moment just changed the rest of my trajectory and, kind of unstuck. And it taught me a lesson of whenever I'm faced with challenges, I remember photos and I remember the balcony and I remember what I saw and just a mind shift. Nothing changed. No building changed, but just a mind shift coming back to that balcony. I saw something different. And he might not know what had happened to me because I never actually took his details, even though I tried to find him later. But he had such an incredible impact in what you call my shitty moment, or that particular particular moment. And he not only changed my life, but he changed the life of many young people.
That's right.
His action.
I'm struck by how this person, whom Refilwe can't even locate anymore, had such a huge impact on her mindset and her trajectory. He pushed her to get out and shift her perspective.
And I love that it can be a small interaction like that contributed to 100,000 girls being exposed to aviation and aeronautics and building skills for STEM careers. Girls Fly Africa organizes lessons and training camps for young women in Botswana, Cameroon, and South Africa, and has impacted over 100,000 young women.
What an incredible impact she's already had on the African continent.
Refilwe's story really underscores a huge task ahead for all of us as we train the next generation of learners. We must help them mind their exposure gaps. Most of us only know what we've seen, and the truth is most young people haven't been exposed to the full spectrum of work that exists today. Studies show that kids with the aptitude for computer science, advanced manufacturing, or agriculture often don't even know those careers are possibilities. And here's why that matters. In an age of AI where entire industries are being reshaped at lightning speed, exposure isn't just nice to have, it's critical. The more our kids can see, try on, and imagine, the better equipped they'll be to navigate the uncertainty ahead.
We may not be able to predict every twist of the future, but we can make sure the next generation has wide horizons to draw from. If we help them broaden their view of what's possible, they'll be able to leap from what is to what might be, with courage, creativity, and purpose.
She's Dana Ellen Walsh.
And she's Michelle Weiss.
Thanks for listening to A Life Worth Working.
If today's conversation resonated with you, please pass it on to someone who might also be searching for more meaning in their work, or what we call the soul of work.
As we navigate the winding, messy pathways of life, perhaps the truest calling is simply this: to stay open to wonder, courageous in release, faithful in response, and to trust that, step by step, we are shaping a life worth working.
Please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Until next time.